Vine stood before her mother's door after gathering all the courage she could, because today she was going to tell her that she has a boyfriend, and that too he is a mafia. She knows that her mother will never accept a boyfriend of her choice. But did her mother ever agree to something she said? No. She thought to herself, and taking a deep breath, she went to her mother's room. Her mother was casually lying on the bed, watching something on her phone with a bright smile on her face. But as soon as she saw Vine in front of her smile disappeared. Vine's mom. Why didn't you go to office today? I told you I won't forgive you if you take another day off. Vine. It's Sunday, Mom, for God's sake, she said annoyingly, not shocked about the question. Her mother rolled her eyes and looked at her phone once again. Vine. I came to talk to you. Vine's mom. About what? I I have a boyfriend and he's coming to meet you. Her mother's eyes wide open as she stared at Vine. She sat straight and said, What, you have a boyfriend? Vine nodded. Her mother scoffed. Vine's mom. And you think I'll just accept some random boy you've picked up, huh? I don't think so. Especially not someone you think is worthy of my standards. Vine sighed. Mom, he's not just some random guy. He's a bit different. Vine's mom raised an eyebrow. Different? How? Vine hesitated. He is in the Mafia. And for the first time, Vine saw genuine shock on her face. Vine's mom. You're telling me your boyfriend is some sort of criminal. Vine. He's not just any criminal, Mom. He's protective. He treats me well and Vine's mom interrupted, scoffing. You must be out of your mind. Men like that, they don't care about people like you. Vine could feel her cheeks heat up with anger. She clenched her fist and said, Don't say things about him without getting to know him. She stood up from her bed and stood in front of Vine and said, Guess I didn't beat you enough for you to dare invite your boyfriend in this house. Vine shouted, Aren't you tired of beating me already? You want to beat me? Do it all you want after he's gone. But please, for once, act like my mother, even if it's an act, she said as her eyes got red and tears filled them. There was silence for a moment, and then her mother slapped her hard on the face and spoke. You have a hearing problem now? What's gotten into you that you're going even against me for that Mafia? He will kill you when he is done with you. He will throw you out when he is bored. Vine. I stayed quiet when you slapped me, but don't you dare say things about him like that. Who are you to even say that? He taught me what love is and how a girl should be treated. If you're not happy with our relation, I will happily run away with him, she whispered. You will go against me just because of him? Is this the reason I've been raising you since you were born, despite the fact that you're a girl? Her mother asked, disappointment and surprise clearly visible on her face. Vine finally let out the tears that she was holding back and spoke without any expressions. Don't all mothers do that? If you hated me that much, then you should have abandoned me. You didn't because you wanted to earn the so called reputation in this household, right? Then why are you blaming me now? Vine. What's my fault here, Mom? Her heart torn into a million pieces as she asked the question she wanted to hear the answer of her whole life. They faced each other as Jungkook entered in the living room silently and stood at his place as he saw the tension in front of him. He saw tears in Vine's eyes and his eyes widened with shock. He stayed at his place watching them without letting them know. Her mother nodded and said, "It's not your fault at all. It's my fault that I gave birth to you." Vine shouted back as loudly as she could. "I never asked you to have me," she whispered. "I never wanted to be born." She cried while saying that. Jungkook's eyes flickered looking at her. He never expected such a relationship between her and her mother. His heart melted as she saw her pitiful face. She was crying badly and fell on the floor on her knees. Jungkook ran and held her in his arms. "Jungkook, you never wanted to be born? Did you even think about me before saying that?" She stopped crying and looked at him, their eyes locking with each other. Her mother looked at them and took a step back, fearing Jungkook. She knows that he's a mafia and could kill both of them right at the moment. Jungkook wiped her tears softly and held her hand. She held it back tightly as she desperately needed a shoulder at the moment. He made her stand up at her place and looked at her mother. Jungkook stepped forward, his voice steady and resolute. "Your daughter? If she seems too much of a burden, then why don't you let her go her own way? Wait, are you forcing or abusing her even when she is an adult?" His words cut through the tension. Vine's mother hesitated before speaking. "You don't have the right to meddle in our family affairs." Jungkook took a step closer, his dark eyes staring at her mother's soul as he said, "True, I don't. But I think the police will have the right. Or maybe we could settle this ourselves." She could sense the underlying threat in his tone, and it sent a chill down her spine. "Jungkook, you may think you have control over Vine, but that control comes with a price. She is not a child anymore. If you push her away, she will find her own path, whether you like it or not." Vine squeezed his hand gently, and Jungkook came out of his anger a bit. He smiled while looking at her. "Jungkook, are you okay?" he said as he saw the redness on her cheek. Vine nodded once through her tears. He hugged her, taking her in with his one arm. At this point, Vine didn't even want to convince her mother. She knew that whatever they say will be ignored by her, and she will, in the end, do as she likes. "Jungkook, you should have told me about this before. I would have taken you away with me before any of this could happen." Vine wanted to speak, but she didn't. She was just tired. Her tears fell from her eyes, and she tried to hide them by wrapping her arms around his back and hiding her face in his embrace. Vine's mother. "Just know that I'll never agree to this relation. You are someone who will never be loved. If he abandons you, you will come running to me, but I'll never ever forgive you then," she said while leaving the room. "Jungkook, that day will never come. Don't you worry," he said while looking at her mother's back while she was leaving. He broke the hug and looked at her. "Are you okay?" She cried again and hugged him with all her might. His heart pounded in his chest as he hugged her and patted her back while he whispered, "Jungkook, it's okay. I'm here for you. You don't need anything or anyone else." Her sobs got louder when she heard those words. After a minute, he broke the hug and wiped her tears. He leaned low to match her height as he looked in her eyes and said, "You're not crying anymore. You hear me? Let's go from here." He extended his hand to Vine, inviting her to leave behind the shadows of her past and step into a future where she would be cherished and valued. Vine looked at his hand for a few seconds and without hesitation held it tightly. He smiled in relief seeing that as he said, You did well. I'm proud of you. She smiled through her tears, knowing that there's someone who appreciated her for her efforts. Her mother looked at them without being able to say a word. As she saw them leaving, she shouted for the last time, "Don't come back to me when he's done with you." Jungkook turned back, hearing her mother, and gave her a glance. The dangerous, piercing glance of his that he usually used for people like her. Her mother was frightened and immediately went inside her room. Vine didn't even turn back to see her mother for the last time, which was a proof that she left everything behind and doesn't want to look back at all. Under his protection, Vine found her home. He shattered the chains of expectations and loved her for who she was. Jungkook opened the door of his car for her to sit in the passenger seat. She went slowly inside, and he closed the door. After sitting inside, he looked at Vine, who was constantly looking downwards, and asked her, "Did you do that wake up for me? But what's the point? You ruined it all by crying." She kept looking down and said, "I never wanted you to see this." He quietened down. He took a sigh and said to her, "I don't want to scold you at this moment, so don't get me started." She looked at him amazingly, and he asked, "Why would you even hide such a thing from me? Don't you even trust me?" Jungkook, "And now I even know that you regret telling me." He paused for a moment and said, looking straight in her eyes, "Are you by any chance embarrassed of me?" Her eyes widened as he was speaking what was in her heart, what she was afraid of. She stayed quiet, hearing him, and looked down. Jungkook held her hand softly and kissed it as he said, "You don't have to be embarrassed. What's your fault here? You didn't have to suffer it alone all this time." "Fine. She is my mother. I can't change that." Jungkook, "But I can change how you are treated." Vine, "I wish I wasn't a girl." Tears welling in her eyes as she said. Jungkook leaned closer and pulled her head towards his chest. He slowly whispered in her ears in a soft voice, "Jungkook, I'm so grateful that you exist. I promise you, you will get all the happiness and respect that you deserve. I will fight for you with every step that I take, and I fight very well for the things that matter for me." Jungkook, "Trust me, you will thank God that you are a girl." She chuckled while wiping her tears. "Fine. I love you, Jungkook." Jungkook, "I love you too." And then they kissed. He could feel her tears during the kiss, but he didn't break the kiss and let her cry. He knew she will be far better after this. He knew that she was stronger than all of this, and he trusted her with closed eyes.